Hi, I think we're live and recording, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome. We're here to discuss where wildlife crossings are needed most in North Carolina. My name is Nikki Robinson, and I'm the North Carolina Projects Manager at Wildlands Network. Joining me here today is our Chief Scientist, Dr. Ron Sutherland, and our GIS Specialist, Alex Vanko. I also want to thank Aaron Cito, our policy associate, for managing all the behind the scenes work to pull off this webinar. We look forward to sharing our statewide analysis, which identifies the top 20 places in North Carolina where wildlife crossings are most needed to improve public safety and habitat connectivity. Ron and Alex will present on the methodology used to create the priority list. And then I'll follow up with an overview of our implementation plans moving forward. This report comes at a really exciting time and a critical juncture as sources of state and federal funding to build wildlife crossings and also retrofit existing structures are expanding. For example, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed in Congress in 2021 includes $350 million for wildlife crossing infrastructure projects through a competitive grant program. So with smart investment like this and continued public support, North Carolina can make its roads safer for people and wildlife alike. So you can post questions in the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your screen throughout the presentation. But we will have a question and answer session after the presentation. So at this time, I will turn things over to Ron.
Cool. All right, well, thanks, Nikki, and hello, everybody out there. It's been a while since I did this and started to talk with the road ecology. So some pictures of actual roadkill, and it's Alex, is that updating? There it goes. Okay, so starting over. So hello everybody. It's been a while since I did this to people and started to talk with some pictures of roadkill. And I think these are fairly tasteful, but I think these are part of the story too. Seeing dead animals on the highway is certainly how most of us become aware that roads pose serious challenges for so many wildlife species. I grew up chasing snakes and turtles, and I think us herpetologists are especially tuned into and saddened by seeing amphibians and reptiles slaughtered on the highway. And from a young age, I really wanted to do something about this problem. And also from a young age, I've been a huge Calvin and Hobbes fan, and I think at least some of my career inspiration must have come from this particular sequence where Calvin comes up with the almost award-winning slogan to be careful or be roadkill. And if only it were that easy for wildlife, they could just be careful and not get run over on the road. Even better would be if wildlife could just magically fly over roads like Santa's reindeer. And is that a painting? There it goes. Yeah, well, we know that doesn't happen. So, birds can certainly fly, but most other vertebrates can't. And so what do we do? Well, fortunately, there are real solutions. They're called wildlife road crossings. And these are structures like the famous ones you see here from Banff National Park that allow terrestrial wildlife to go over or under busy roads. And data from Banff and other studies show that when paired with the right kind of wildlife fencing to guide the animals to these crossings, these structures can reduce wildlife collisions with vehicles by 80 or 90% or more. They can be expensive though, several $1 million each sometimes, so we can't afford to build them everywhere. So the big question becomes, where do we want to put wildlife crossings to do the most good for wildlife and also to improve human safety on the road? And then the second question is, how do we pay for all that? So the group we work for, Wildlands Network, has been leading the charge, with partners of course, to answer those questions across the US, Canada, and Mexico. We're a nonprofit conservation group dedicated to reconnecting, restoring, and rewilding nature across North America. And road ecology is one of our top priorities, for sure. And while we have a continental perspective, Wildlands Network has had a special focus on North Carolina, particularly since I was hired all the way back in 2010. And by 2015, we were ready to launch an effort to prioritize wildlife road crossing locations, potential locations for crossings across North Carolina, and with help from my colleague Maggie Ernest-Johnson, shown here. But I should pause the story for a second here and thank the generous sponsors of our wildlife connectivity work in North Carolina, particularly Brad and Shelley Standback, the Blumenthal Foundation, the Volgino Foundation, and many private donors. If you're listening to this webinar and you've donated to Wildlands Network, please accept our personal thanks and pat yourself on the back for making it all possible. So back to the story. Maggie and I worked together to produce a technical report by 2017 that used some fairly straightforward GIS techniques to stack up different layers and see which road segments emerged as priorities for wildlife. And we did two different models, actually, one for large species and one for small. And I won't cover the details today, but we're happy to send you the full 2017 report if you're interested. And then we did a third model that was actually the large and small species together. And so here's the large species model with warmer colors indicating higher priority scores. And these models seem to work pretty well. They were a little simple, but it was difficult to boil down the entire map into a clear set of priorities. We also wanted to run the draft models by wildlife experts across North Carolina and get their feedback, but that effort got delayed by a few factors, one of which was this global pandemic that you may have heard of. But as Nikki mentioned, just last year, Congress passed President Biden's infrastructure bill with $350 million for wildlife road crossing grants included. And incidentally, Wildlands Network played an instrumental role. Susan Holmes and Aaron Cito and others played a huge role in making sure that wildlife crossing money was in that infrastructure bill. So we can claim a little credit there with our partners. And we knew we wanted North Carolina to be competitive for one or more of these grants coming from the federal government. So to help the state be strategic, we launched a reinvigorated effort to identify the top 20 wildlife crossing sites for North Carolina. And the way we approached it was first to identify a wide range of potential locations and then get expert review to help us pick the top 20. So to assemble the master list of crossing sites, we first pulled out the highest ranking segments from the 2017 models. We took the highest ones for the small species model, the highest ones for the large species, and the highest ones for the combined. And then we added in key sites for certain endangered species, most notably the red wolf shown here, which has been experiencing really high road mortality in recent years. So we added sites for the red wolf. And then we included a number of sites, potential sites where key wildlife corridors intersected with major highways. And shown here is our Eastern Wildway Vision Map. It's a map of a robust habitat network that could, if we all try hard and work together on a voluntary basis, be restored and conserved for the entire East Coast from Florida to Quebec. And then here's some of the potential crossing sites, road crossing sites we added where the Eastern Wildway intersects with major highways. And we did the same process for a connectivity conservation plan we put together for Western North Carolina for the Blue Ridge Forever Coalition of Land Trusts up there. And here the orange and yellow are the corridors connecting the green protected areas that we have up in the mountains of North Carolina. And again, here are those points where the corridors intersect with major highways. And then, since it had been a few years, we wanted to revisit the deer collision hotspot data we'd used in the 2017 report. That's now 5 years out of date. And so here's the North Carolina State Maintained Roads layer. I'll wait for that to come up. There it is. It's a bit shocking if you haven't seen this before, just how many miles of roads North Carolina maintains across this state. And and here's all the deer crashes, which is even more shocking. This is all the wildlife crashes from 2016 to 2020, so 5 years of data, courtesy of NCDOT, and it's mostly deer. There's a few bears and other things mixed in there, but by and large, these are mostly deer collisions. And it looks impossibly daunting. You can't even see those roads. In some ways, it certainly is. I mean, deer are ubiquitous across North Carolina, and you always have a chance of hitting one. But we wanted to identify true hotspots where the number of collisions was highest. So what we did was run a 500-meter radius moving window across North Carolina and count up all the crashes in that radius. And here's the resulting layer. Now you can actually see the variation. You don't just see that big stack of points everywhere, but you actually see where there's more crashes and where there's not. The warmer colors are higher numbers of crashes, higher crash density in a given road in North Carolina. And you'll see it much better if we zoom in. So, of course, here's the Raleigh Beltline. This is the triangle area: Raleigh, Durham, Cary, Chapel Hill. And so that's the road network. And then here's the deer collision density data for the same area. And you can actually see where some of the crashes are concentrating in certain areas. And there are a few places where it seems like the intersections pick up a high number of crashes, and that's just because you have two roads in that search radius. But some of the other points are definitely sort of true hotspots of deer crashes. So further east, looking towards the east, there were some real hotspots of deer crashes down east of Greenville, and where you can see orange and yellow on there. Go to the next slide, and you can actually see where Greenville is. And what we did is we pulled out those hotspots by looking for any places that had 15 or more crashes, wildlife crashes, in that sort of 1 kilometer wide window, so 500 meters in each way, over the 5-year period. And if you convert that all to miles, it actually works out to 5 crashes per mile per year. And that's the threshold for which some studies have suggested that wildlife road crossings can be expected to easily pay for themselves over time. And in North Carolina, there were about 45 of those locations from 2016 to 2020. And we kept about 42 in as potential priority sites. We dropped some of them. We were already covering some of them for another reason or another. And here, looking big picture, here are those wildlife vehicle collision hotspots for deer, mostly in North Carolina. And then, the next slide, if we combine those deer crash hotspots with the other potential priority sites, we ended up with a set of 155 locations that were important for one reason or another. And this was the starting point for determining the top 20. And I want to pause here and just reiterate that, given the scale of the wildlife collision problem in North Carolina, all these sites are important in their own right, obviously for different reasons. But as we move forward in North Carolina and see opportunities for getting engaged or making progress for wildlife on any of these roads, I hope we'll keep this master list in mind. But now I'm going to turn it back over to Alex, who's going to explain how we worked with experts to both expand this master list and then boil it down for our top 20 report.
Hey everyone. So at this point in the analysis, our main question was, how do we narrow down our extensive list of, it was now 155 high priority crossing mitigation sites to the top 20 highest priority sites across North Carolina? As we said, our strategy was to ask the experts. So we shared a web map of our top 155 sites with about 175 wildlife experts across North Carolina, representing government agencies, universities, and nonprofit organizations mostly. We asked each respondent to look at this list, look at the map, and kind of create their own ranking. So they could pick any sites they wanted to be in their own top 10, say what those are, and create your own top 10 list. So 42 experts responded to this out of the 175, and a huge thanks to everyone who did. We could not have done this report without you. These are all the logos of people who got back to us. And once we had those responses, each priority site was assigned a number of votes equal to basically the number of respondents who put that site in their top 10 list. So here's what the web map looks like that I sent out to our respondents. Each respondent was able to zoom in and scroll around this live map to look more closely at any of the 155 priority sites, all shown here in blue. And you can also turn on and off a variety of helpful data layers to show some of the factors we used in choosing these priority sites or other helpful information. So for example, in this view, you can see wildlife vehicle collision hotspots in orange and protected lands in green, and to the west, the Appalachian Trail in purple. In this view here, you can see the corridors and corridors of the Eastern Wildway that we showed before, and the Blue Ridge Forever priority corridors in the west. Again, all just to sort of help you look around and decide what you think is important out of these that you would put in your top 10. We also asked our respondent experts to suggest additional priority sites that we may have missed in our top 155 and to give a reason why that new site is important or should be a priority. So our respondents recommended 24 additional sites, which we added into that list for a total of, at this point, 179 priority crossing sites in the state. Finally, we wanted to make sure that this list wasn't geographically biased to favor one part of the state, especially because our expert respondents were not necessarily evenly distributed. So we stratified the list using the 4 ecoregions of North Carolina broadly, the Blue Ridge Mountains, Sandhills, Piedmont, and the Coastal Plain. We allotted 6 of those top 20 sites for the mountains, 6 for the Coastal Plain, and just 4 sites each for the Piedmont and Sandhills, just because they're smaller regions geographically. This is the result. This is our map of the top 20 priority opportunities for wildlife road crossing improvements across North Carolina. So again, it bears repeating here that there's nothing magical or scientific about limiting this list to 20. There's nothing special about that number. And there are many, many more sites across the state that need this kind of work, that need wildlife crossing improvements. But we hope that this list will help focus action and mobilize resources towards some of the areas with the greatest need that could benefit the most from this work. The last step was to vet each of these top 20 sites by actually visiting them in person. So we examined each site to note things like whether any potential crossing structures were already present, if those structures were, looked like they were able to be used by wildlife, and what the land and the habitat on either side of the road looked like, and sort of if expectation on the ground matched what our models were telling us. And so all of this info helped inform our recommendations that we put into our final report. So we'd invite you, if you haven't already, to check out the full report, which we put out a few weeks ago now. You can find it on the front page still of our website, wildlandsnetwork.org. And it's got a lot more detail about each of these 20 sites, where they are, close-up maps, all sorts of statistics on how we chose them, plus lists of the larger list as well of all 179 sites, plus links to download shapefiles, geospatial files of the top 20 and the top 179 sites that you can download and sort of examine, use however you'd like. We'd also ask all of you to please keep in touch. We're looking for basically continual feedback and updates as we continue this effort to drive crossing mitigation in the state. Specifically, we want to know if there are critical priority spots that you think we missed, or if there are sites that are on our list but that have already had wildlife mitigations or crossing structures put in that we don't know about. That data is a bit hard to come by. And of course, ideally in the future, we'd love to be able to start taking priority sites off of our list once they are actually addressed and improved with new road crossings or mitigation projects. And I will hand it back to Nikki.
Thanks, Alex. So moving forward, our team will work closely with our state agency staff, our NGO partners, and state legislators to implement crossings initiatives to the areas just identified throughout this report. Our hope is that this top 20 list will make North Carolina more competitive for federal dollars dedicated for wildlife crossing funding. And we're also thinking long-term. We want to support land conservation strategies that will protect quality habitat in perpetuity to ensure effective connectivity for years to come. In order to successfully act on the findings from this report, we want input from state agencies to create alignment and collaborate on mutual goals. Like Alex said, we always welcome updates and additional information, including any crossings work that's already underway at any of these sites or new sites, or any sites that we haven't mentioned today. For these large-scale, often very complex projects, public-private partnerships are very successful mechanisms to leverage private dollars to provide matching funds for larger grants. And eventually, we'd like to see wildlife connectivity incorporated in future transportation improvement and development plans. I'll highlight one major success story we shared with our partners advocating for wildlife crossing infrastructure on Interstate 40 in the Pigeon River Gorge this year. Wildlands Network and the National Parks Conservation Association conducted a 3-year research analysis of key hotspots for wildlife movement and for strategies to protect them from traffic along a 28-mile stretch of Interstate 40 in western North Carolina and eastern Tennessee. This area, known as the Pigeon River Gorge, is one of the top 20 sites identified on our statewide prioritization report. So we sat down with Governor Cooper and Secretary Reed Wilson of the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and we discussed the science behind wildlife crossings and the potential for crossings in North Carolina. And we discussed how North Carolina can be a leader for this work in the Eastern United States, elevating our state's profile on a national level by improving safety for travelers through this science-driven design. Both the governor and the secretary voiced their enthusiastic support. And in closing, I'd like to share some additional resources and how to access them. So the Wildlands Network website is a great place to start to read the full crossings prioritization report. The link is included. And you can also identify the full list of 179 hotspot sites identified, as well as downloading the maps or the shape files to the corresponding locations if those are helpful. Sometimes reading about funding opportunities and eligibility can be daunting. So our policy team and other colleagues have done a great job creating fact sheets, outlining available funding and sources for connectivity. Please reach out directly if we can help you learn more of that in any way. And if you want to learn more about the road ecology research in the Pigeon River Gorge, I encourage you to look through this report available on the website's resource page. And actually, great timing, tomorrow, we will be releasing a short video in partnership with NPCA, highlighting the impact this project will ultimately have on wildlife connectivity in Western North Carolina. So Wildlands Network wants to establish a public-private working group with the agencies, the NGOs, and other interested parties to implement the findings of this report. So if you're interested in joining a statewide working group, please drop your contact information in the chat box to us directly, and we'll collect it for future communications and action items. And so this time, that's the presentation. So we'd like to take some time to answer all of your questions and further this discussion. And if you want to go back and look at a slide that has maps and we want to talk about them more closely, we can do that. And I just want to thank you all for joining us here today, and we'll continue this awesome discussion. Okay, so just give me a minute to find these questions. We just covered everything so perfectly.
Yeah. Some people might not have been in the room yet to hear you said at the beginning that there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. There should be, where you can open that up and put in a Q&A question that'll come to us.
Okay, here we go. Here's a question. Are you collaborating with tribal agencies on crossings projects? Does anyone want to take that, or should I?
I know some of it. I think the Pigeon River Gorge project, for example, up in the mountains of North Carolina and Tennessee, we've definitely had some engagement with the Cherokee Nation on that effort, and they've wanted to be involved. The reservation that the Cherokee are on is not right next to I-40, but there's another road, US 19, that cuts right by their land, and I think they're very interested in looking at the very serious problem of elk roadkill happening on that highway, and so we're going in that direction. I think is trying to work with them on that. So it's a good question.
Has Wildlands Network pursued partnerships with any land conservancies to try and conserve tracts of land near these 20 corridor locations?
Let me cover that one too. I think so far, one of the most exciting things that's happened is we've definitely seen some really, on one of the corridors up in the mountains, and I probably won't say which one, just to keep it quiet because we're still looking at buying more land up there. But we've definitely had a collaboration with one of the land trusts, Southern Appalachian Highland Conservancy up there, and not just us, but all the partners in like the Pigeon River Gorge project, but and others working on this site. So there's been some really exciting efforts, and the reason why we want to conserve land next to a highway, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but if we don't protect the land now, then the opportunity to build a wildlife crossing in the future is going to be ruined if somebody goes and builds a giant suburb right next to the highway, and that is exactly what tends to happen. These are along these interstate highways. If we don't protect some gaps in development along the highway, then we won't have room for wildlife to get over under the road.
Thanks. How does NCDOT track or report roadkill?
I think they're collision reports that filter in, and then the DOT compiles those, and they issue a report every year, and it kind of summarizes the last 3 years worth of data. North Carolina tends to have about close to 20,000 collisions every year. And that's the reported ones. And of course, there's various good reasons, to think that the actual number of even just deer collisions is probably at least twice as high. And then if you think about all the other wildlife, the raccoons and snakes and turtles and things, it's probably orders and orders of magnitude higher than that. So there's definitely room for improvement, I think, especially in terms of the spatial accuracy. We would love to move North Carolina towards a situation where everybody who is responsible for responding to accidents or cleaning the highway or what have you would have access to like a phone app where they could put in a very exact location and take a picture of the animal so that we can double check and make sure that they really did see a moose dead on the side of I-40 up there in North Carolina, for example. So that's where we would like to go. I know some states have done that. I think North Carolina can go in that direction.
All right, here's some questions for Alex. Is there a write-up of the methods used to create the heat map? If so, where might we find that? Or I don't know, Alex, you didn't make that map?
Yeah, so yeah, actually Ron put that together. But so the report that we keep sending you towards does have methods on all steps of this process. If you have more granular questions about the actual nuts and bolts of that particular heat map or anything else, you can feel free to email Ron or I if the report doesn't answer your question.
And can you explain the DVC buffer size a little bit more? What was buffered by 500 meters?
Yeah, I can give that a shot, and then Alex can fill in if I mess something up. But it was a pretty straightforward analysis, really. We took those 5 years worth of points And then we broke the state up into a 500 meter sort of grid, 500 meter pixels, 500 meters by 500 meters. And then for the center, from the center of each of those pixels, we ran a circular moving window of a 500 meter radius. So really it's a pretty narrow focus around the center of each of those pixels, and simply counted up how many deer vehicle collision or how many wildlife crashes were in that 500 meter radius. And then there was a little bit of math involved to convert from that sort of number of crashes per that particular area, and then we could actually convert it to like the actual integer number of crashes that represented. But yeah, pretty simple analysis. I'm happy to share the data with anybody that would like to see it.
Here's a question. How is your study identifying hotspots funded? Maybe Ron, if you want to just go back to that slide, or Alex, if you want to go back to that slide where we thanked the funders.
Yeah, nice. We definitely appreciative of our nice mix of funders who fund our work. This particular study was not funded by a government contract. We're certainly open to government contracts if anybody's out there wanting to get this done for another state. But in this case, we funded it with private dollars.
Are any crossings near bridges or culverts? Are there opportunities to increase wildlife crossings as a part of bridge replacements and replacing undersized culverts?
It's a great question, Bill. The short answer is yes. A lot of these sites have existing infrastructure in terms of small creek culverts, small bridges, and things like that. And so not only is there the $350 million for wildlife crossings, the pilot project, but the same infrastructure bill also included something on the order of $1 billion or more for culvert replacement. And so there's actually a huge opportunity right now across the entire United States to get busy replacing culverts that are interfering with aquatic connectivity, because a lot of times creeks that go into roads, they become kind of stranded on one end, they get too high, and the fish and the salamanders can't cross under the road in that culvert. But if you're going to replace the culvert, you can make it big enough, and then some of the terrestrial wildlife can go through there too. And there's a complicating factor when we're thinking about where to put wildlife crossings. It's the state has done a fair bit of work when they've been building or replacing bridges around North Carolina. Travis Wilson and others with the State Wildlife Resources Commission have been liaisoning with the state DOT to inject some wildlife friendly ideas into each of those new bridges that gets built if they're in an area that's important for wildlife. And so one task that we'd like to tackle at some point here is sort of inventorying the existing wildlife friendly bridges around North Carolina, because there are some. I can name one in particular. Here in Durham, the 15501 bridge over New Hope Creek, and we've been studying that for several years with cameras and found that bridge is working really well for wildlife. And it was expanded to 300 feet long, so there's plenty of room for wildlife underneath there. And I think there's lots of room for doing that in other places around North Carolina, and there's lots to learn about where some of these existing holes are under these busy interstates where wildlife can already get through.
Great. Okay, here's some more questions. While assigning the top 20 is valuable for seeking grants, are you working to coordinate efforts by the state DOT and wildlife agencies to identify priority locations that are within the FDOT work program, whereby wildlife crossings can be included in major road improvement projects?
So short answer, yes. And Dan, that's the reason why we wanted to go ahead and we were including our master list of 179 points when we're sharing this data, is because we recognize that the NCDOT is working and at a phenomenal scale across the entire state. They have so many projects going on at any one point. So we want, it's more of a matrix algebra problem than it is just a simple list of 20 sites. So the DOT is working on this particular road. We want to work with them to make sure that they reference this report and say, hey, look, this stretch of highway 441 has a key opportunity for wildlife crossing. And so while we're going ahead and four-laning this highway, we should go ahead and think about expanding the wildlife options to get underneath the highway. The top 20, are in our, at least in my head, at least, these are sites that are high enough importance to where we want to pursue sort of, even if the DOT is not doing a project on that particular piece of road in the next 40 years, we would like to go ahead and push for something to happen there. And the reality is that some of these, even within the top 20, some of the sites are probably not due for any projects anytime soon, but some of them actually are. And that's the challenge is some of these top 20, we may only have a year or two to engage to get some wildlife friendly infrastructure in place, which is not much time.
Oh, this is a good one. In terms of protection of parcels at potential crossing structure sites, are those parcels that would be ideally owned long-term by DOT, or can DOT construct these structures just within the right-of-way?
My understanding is it's the DOT is mostly going to be focused on that right-of-way, and so the land trusts and other agencies that, or like the State Wildlife Resources Commission or Army Corps in some cases, would own the land that we want to be protected, or it could be an easement, a conservation easement on private land, and which works just as well. I think the DOT is mostly just going to say, they're going to look at this and say, is it worth us spending X millions of dollars to build a nice fancy wildlife crossing at this site because this land is or is not protected? And I think if the land on either side is protected and it's secure, then that answers that question. I don't think the DOT has to own it themselves.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I think that's why the land conservation component is so important, because we don't want to build these crossing structures and then have new development sort of fragment them so that wildlife can't get to them because there's a parking lot or housing development or something like that when it used to be forest. Okay. What insights and suggestions do you have for getting funding and implementing road crossings when we need to keep the location protected? For example, concerns about illegal collection of rare herbs, for example.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, and I might turn the questions back to Gabrielle and ask her for insights, because I know that there was recently a crossing that has been completed for rare herbs. And I won't say what species, but I think it's a challenge when you can't go public with what you're trying to do. But there's a lot of private wildlife enthusiasts out there who I think would contribute to a project, even if they weren't allowed to know specifically where it was. I think if you would make it clear that that for this species X, we're going to build this amazing wildlife crossing, and so I think there's folks out there that help pay for it. I think the state agencies, the federal wildlife agencies, are certainly willing to collaborate on behalf of a species like that. And in terms of rare herbs, there's no shortage of species that are really threatened by roads. So I think that's going to be a big issue. And we intentionally tried not to put too much rare herb information into our report as well, because we didn't want to highlight those spots. So there's lots of work to do.
Great. Is there a plan to have NCDOT standard for incorporating wildlife crossings in the construction of new highways? I'll just say this is like step one of the plan. I don't think there's, well, and that's why we were seeking interest in that statewide group to further this conversation. So yes, that is the intention. And we're hoping that this report sort of serves as a foundation for which to build on. So we plan on working with the agencies, DOT, WRC, but then also, you know, state legislation. We've seen great things done in other states that have forwarded wildlife connectivity through through new laws. So we're exploring those options as well. More questions. Are the hotspots on all state roads? Did you look at local roads? How do you coordinate with both the state road agency and the many municipal road agencies to ensure crossings are considered during road project planning?
That's a great question. And you know, our analysis was we were trying to look at the sort of the worst of the worst. So the busiest highways crossing through the biggest and most important wildlife areas, essentially. And so we did not focus very much on smaller local roads with less traffic. But somebody who lives in a neighborhood that has a huge amount of roadkill, you know, our vultures stay very busy in my part of South Durham, because there's lots of nice creek corridors that cross very busy roads. And some of those roads are just, you know, local roads that wouldn't show up in an analysis like this. And it's not to say they're not opportunities for that. So I think there's a lot of room to be collaborating with local governments at the county and municipal level, and get them aware of these opportunities for fairly, you know, in some cases fairly cheaply. Like a salamander crossing doesn't have to cost very much if you're repaving a road that crosses a nice little spot where there's marbled salamanders, say. Then you know, I think you could put in a crossing for marbled salamanders and it wouldn't cost that much or add that much to the project. A lot of times, I think, you know, for that at the municipal level, you know, we need local champions to make those projects work. So if you're out there listening to this and have a project in mind, you know, take the initiative and start pushing your local transportation planners to make that an issue and get it on their radar.
Oh, and this one, I sort of skipped over it, but this is from earlier from the Conservation Fund has been acquiring land in Maggie Valley for watershed protection and to expand the silver game land. We'd like more information about US 19 Soco Road at the Blue Ridge Parkway crossing, which I believe we have more information and data on that from our colleague, Dr. Liz Hillard, who's working on road ecology research in the mountains specifically. And she's done a lot of elk collaring GPS data in that area. So I think we'll have some information to share soon about that.
Yeah. And then to reiterate, you know, we're also very thankful for the Conservation Fund for stepping up their efforts up there in Western North Carolina to protect the elk, you know, elk habitat, and then also to be protecting habitat that ties into these potential wildlife crossings. So thanks, Bill.
In terms of land conservation organizations in North Carolina, are there any that stand out as front runners in acquiring and protecting corridors adjacent to roadways, specifically in the efforts to support wildlife crossings?
Oh gosh. Well, we've named a couple of them. Yeah, but I think, you know, I don't want to alienate any of our partners by omitting them. But I think there's a great deal of interest in the part of land trusts across North Carolina in helping improve wildlife connectivity. And so I think, you know, as far as I know, any of the land trusts in North Carolina would be pretty eager to work on a project like this as a partner with a you know, more wildlife centric group that's focused on the wildlife movement. So I think there's or with the state agencies that need help getting land bought quickly. Tons of room for that kind of collaboration.
Yes, and I'll add, I think most land trusts are working on wildlife habitat conservation issues, or at least you can, learn more about them from their websites to read their priorities or their strategies for land acquisition. But yeah, I think they're all across the state. So thanks to all the great land trusts out there. Okay, let's see. So many questions. Oh, is there a plan for education and outreach for the public and to engage local communities for support? It would be great to highlight the wildlife species mortality issues of some of the top 20. Yes, definitely. And there are some groups working at some of these hotspot locations right now that want to see crossings. So having this report ready for them as a resource, hopefully will make their project, or will elevate their project to be more competitive for funding opportunities and to help them gain local support. We're doing public outreach and education on I-40 in the Pigeon River Gorge. We're also doing a lot out on the eastern part of the state near the Alligator River Wildlife Refuge, because the red wolf mortality issue is such a big proponent of red wolf mortality. So we're doing some outreach there. But yeah, this report is sort of an outreach tool in itself. So we're hoping that everyone in North Carolina finds it relevant because they can find a hotspot location near them. Anybody have Ron or Alex, do you have anything to add to any of that so far? Let's see. That might be all of our questions.
Good answer. Yeah.
Yeah, so like we said, if you want to stay involved with communications updates, or if you're interested in potentially joining a statewide working group to further connectivity initiatives, please share your contact information with us. And yeah, if there are any more questions, we can take them now. Otherwise, thank you all for this great discussion and tuning in to hear about our research report. And thanks again for everything. We'll see great things happen in North Carolina.
Yeah.